Okie dokie, everybody, howdy. So this is going to be completely different from the thing this morning. So this is actually like a talk about the web and Drupal and things like that. So we're going to talk about the future of the CMS and more specifically the future of content. We're going to talk about decoupled architectures, multiple front ends, content as a service. I'll explain what all that means in a moment. So again, my name is Todd Winkert. I'm CEO, co-founder, digital strategist at 4 Kitchens. That's how you get a hold of me. On to the good stuff. So in this session, I want you to rethink how we manage, publish, and consume content. We are going to talk about what decoupled means. Who here, by the way, has heard of decoupled architecture? Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means. We're going to talk about when it makes sense. And then we're going to talk about what's next, what's beyond, specifically for decoupled and content. Okay, so let's define decoupled, because this gets thrown around a lot. So of the people who have heard of decoupled, who here feels like you could actually explain it to somebody in detail? Okay, cool. So let's all learn together then, shall we? So currently, this is how a lot of content management systems operate. You have a content management system like Drupal or WordPress or insert blank here, and it provides the front end and the back end. So meaning back end is your content, and the front end is how it's displayed. So the way it's displayed, it might be on a laptop, it might be on a tablet or a phone, or maybe it's an RSS feed that's attached to your website somehow. And on the back end, you're dealing with things like a lot of text. You're dealing with media assets, video, audio, images. Maybe you have some user-generated content, comments or user data, stuff like that, user profiles. So that's currently the state of things. What if, though, we could separate these two, right, into front end and back end? Some people then refer to the front end as the head of a website because it's the thing that sort of is outward facing in the world. And therefore the back end would be the body. And that separation then is that it's decoupled. Some people also call this headless architecture. That seems a little visceral to me, so we'll just call it decoupled. So this is what we mean. We mean separating the front end from the back end, where the content management system is dealing primarily with the back end. What is the most common front end that we all deal with right now? The web, exactly. So here we have, you nailed it. So let's start thinking then about front ends as very specific entities. So when we talk about the front end, we most commonly mean your website, the thing that people see when they go to a URL. They see some images and colors and style sheets and content. But there's all kinds of other front ends. There could be native applications on iPhone, Android. There might be AMP. Wink. There's a talk about AMP later today. There might be AMP. You might have a lot of JSON feeds, RSS feeds, content feeds. You might also be sending content directly to some screen readers. You might be sending content to Xbox, like if you're Netflix. Netflix has an Xbox app where people can watch Netflix movies and TV shows on the Xbox. That is coming from the web, right? Smart TV, Samsung streaming devices, Samsung Smart TV, Roku, Apple TV, stuff like that. And of course, more and more we're hearing about voice-controlled devices like Alexa. So all of these are actually front ends for stuff that can be stored on the web, and what ties them together is some kind of connection, in this case an API. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So this is what we believe is the future of the CMS, where all of these front ends are first-class citizens. They're not just derivatives of your website, and things that are sent through the web then onward at a third layer to some other place. They all come directly from the back end, and where everything then starts with content. Content is king, right? This is what decoupled really means. So when does it make sense? I'm going to go through a lot of like practical, or in some cases, depending on where you stand, very impractical reasons as to why you should or should not do this. It is not for everybody. I want to be like super clear about that. I'm not saying that the future of Drupal is it's not going to serve web pages, or the future of WordPress is it's not going to serve web pages. It totally is. But there are certain situations in which it absolutely makes sense to decouple the two and create something different for your website. So let's say you're the kind of organization that really wants to adopt cutting-edge front-end technologies for whatever reason. Let's say you're a technology firm, or you're heavily invested in marketing, and so you want something that you can constantly iterate on very quickly. We all know how difficult and lengthy and painful it can be to create a Drupal theme, right? So what if you just needed like more of a brochureware style site? You didn't want to rely on people with niche skills working with PHP template or Twig or something like that, and you just needed people who knew HTML, JavaScript, CSS. Boom, here's a website, right, with content stored somewhere else. Here's what we currently get with more enterprise or stable platforms like Drupal. We have a backend that is safe and reliable. There are known solutions and expected results. And the same thing with the front end, safe, repeatable, known solutions, expected results. The thing is, this can be boring. And we all know how long development cycles take with Drupal and how the front end really can't keep pace. And this isn't just Drupal, this is any real large, well-adopted CMS. The front end can never keep pace with front end technologies overall on the web. So then if you wanted to go all out and just say, we want all the new hot stuff, we want this week's latest, coolest JavaScript kind of platform, right? And do the same thing on the back end. Like, we're going to do a mean stack instead of a lamp stack. We're going to do all of this stuff, fancy new database technologies and alternatives to like Nginx and whatever. So then we have this bleeding edge tech, richest experience, high risk, high reward kind of environment that can be incredibly dangerous when you're dealing with high profile sites or high traffic sites. But what if we could kind of split the difference there and say on the back end, we want something that's safe and repeatable, known and expected. But on the front end, we can have bleeding edge technology, rich experience, do all kinds of crazy stuff. This is like the Goldilocks solution. This is the just right. We can split the difference there. And this also deals with one of the biggest complaints that a lot of front-end developers have with things like Drupal and WordPress, where like the latest version of jQuery isn't installed and they have to deal with all these old technologies, right? Well, here you can adopt high-risk, high-reward, bleeding-edge technology stuff, which then leads us directly into the next reason why you might want to consider decoupling. It's to separate your upgrades from your redesigns. So here's the situation that we currently have when we're working with any kind of large CMS. You're going to launch a new CMS or migrate to a new platform or something, and in the course of doing that, you're basically going to have to do a redesign because you have to completely rebuild the front end. And in doing so, there are fixes you want to make. So you just kind of do the whole thing, and now you have a giant migration that you have to do. Well, the way that costs a lot of money, right? And you have to justify a big capital expense to make that happen, and you want to get life out of that. So that might take a year or two for you to get budget again to be able to do some kind of sizable project. Well, by that time, usually it's something, well, now Drupal 8 has come out, or WordPress 3 has come out, and now you have to do this really big upgrade. Well, while you're doing that, by the way, the front end has completely changed, so you're going to have to rewrite the theme anyway. While you're rewriting the theme, you may as well do a little bit of a redesign. And then this is kind of the pattern that we get in, right? Where it's like, do the whole thing all over again every couple of years. And that's expensive and it's frustrating, and there are boards of directors that are going to ask things like, why are you doing that? That's crazy. Why doesn't this last longer? But this is how the web moves. So when you decouple, you can separate those upgrades and redesigns. You're not necessarily going to save money. In fact, it might cost marginally a little bit more in the long run to do this, but you can better pace your spending. So of course you have to relaunch on the whole new platform, this new thing that is decoupled. But then you can upgrade your CMS without having to do a redesign because you're only messing with the database and the editorial experience and the backend. And you might have to rewrite a little bit of that content API that actually sends content from the database to the front end. But the front end is still the same kind of thing. You don't necessarily have to touch it. Then you can redo the front end on whatever timeline you prefer. Then you can upgrade your CMS. You can do a redesign again, right? So you're not pushing a giant boulder up a hill. I don't use whatever metaphor you want. 2 small boulders that you can juggle. That works. Decoupled also helps you keep pace with front-end technology. So let's say that you do your big redesign, you launch this new decoupled platform. Well, let's say, you know what, Angular is a hot new thing. We're going to redo it on Angular. Like, well, okay, now React is a hot new thing. Let's do React. Then let's do Backbone. Let's do Ember. Let's upgrade the CMS. Let's switch to Polymer, right? So if you're the kind of organization that behaves like this, you need a system that can actually fulfill your wishes. So this is a way to handle that. I'm not necessarily saying anybody should do this. This is kind of crazy, but this does allow you to do it. But here's where it gets really cool. So decoupled allows multiple front ends and experiences, right? This is the web and the Xbox and everything. So you relaunch your whole thing, right? You got your website going. Now you can do your iOS app. And it's a lot easier for you to build that because you've already built the content model in your content management system. You already have everything ready to go. You might have to add a few fields that are specific to iOS. But now you can build it, and you don't necessarily have to re-engineer anything on the back end, because you've already built the API that takes the content from Drupal and makes it available to whatever you want. Then you can switch over to Roku. Then you can do a web redesign. Then maybe you upgrade your CMS, and you don't have to touch anything else, right? All that stuff still lives on. You don't have to redo any of it. And then maybe you go back and do an iOS redesign, and you repeat every few years. Decoupling, again, makes sense when you need to eliminate the tension that you feel between a design and a content management system. So in my experience as a former designer and developer, working with a CMS and a design kind of felt like this, right? Where, you know, maybe this is the design and maybe that's the CMS, and you're wondering, like, who's walking who here, right? Who here has dealt with a situation where, as a designer, you want to do something, but then a developer says, well, it doesn't really work like that, right? Exactly. And you're like, what do you mean? But, you know, this is what the user needs, and how do we make that work? Like, well, it's going to be really expensive to make that happen, or it's maybe, you know, it's not that it's impossible, it's just not really feasible given the budget that you have, or whatever. And that's because there are two philosophies for designing for a CMS, and it depends really on where your background comes from. I come from a more technical background, 4Kitchens comes from a more technical background, so we tend to adopt the CMS first approach. The CMS first approach states that a user's needs are very important, no question, right? The users, they're the people who use the site, who are getting the content, that are your customers or your constituents or whatever. You do need to pay attention to their needs, but maybe we can come up with a different way to satisfy that user need. Maybe we can fudge that functionality a little bit and make it fit into what the CMS wants to do more naturally. And that's largely because we have to save cost and reduce custom code. So we want to change the behavior, change the design to align with the natural tendencies of the CMS in order to minimize custom code, minimize points of failure, make it easier to maintain in the future, and most importantly, not to hack the core. In the design-first world, the user's needs are paramount and non-negotiable. This, we have used in-depth user research to determine that this is going to be the best or most profitable or most effective way forward. Therefore, this is what we have to do. The design must be executed as is. And unfortunately, what that involves in a lot of cases, and organizations that have more of a design background than a technical background, or organizations that are used to just handing everything off to some other partner, will do kind of whatever it takes to arrive at that design. They're going to potentially hack core, or hack some contrib modules, or do a whole bunch of custom code that then somebody is going to have to untangle at some point when something goes wrong, inevitably, right? So complicated code-based custom code affects maintainability. The thing is, neither philosophy is really wrong. It's kind of like, which thing do you value more? But in decoupling, you can potentially satisfy both. Meaning, if your CMS wants to behave in a certain way, it's probably because of the functionality that it's exposing to the front end, right? But if you eliminate the front end from the equation, you can build whatever front end you want. And now you're not really limited to what the CMS can or can't do, and you don't have to deal with any kind of custom code whatsoever, except maybe for the content API. If there's some fancy content thing you want to do, like inline editable fields, well, that's kind of doable in Drupal. You need to jump through a couple of hoops to make that happen, but it's a lot easier to do it on a separate front-end platform in JavaScript and send like one, database insert or whatever, than it is to have to rewrite all of Drupal's like Node API. Decoupling may also make sense if you want to centralize your content. So how many people here work for a multi-departmental organization like a university or a large corporation? Super. So this especially applies to you. So again, this is probably the situation you're in right now. There's your website, and it's both a front end and a back end. And you have some content on it, it's displaying the content, and all is well and good. Well, your colleague Sarah in the other department, let's say you're in strategic communications and Sarah's over in the law school, then you have Frank in biosciences, and Laura's at the registrar's office, and I'm not going to be able to keep track of all these, Bob's somewhere else. So we have like all these islands, right? And they're not really interacting. Everybody's producing all their own content, and it's all kind of living on these various islands. What if, however, we could decouple all of this, centralize the content, so that your website is one front end to a central content hub, that Frank and Laura and Bob and Sarah all connect to through an API. So this then means that Sarah, in the law school, publishes a really interesting article on the Supreme Court decision to allow gene patenting. That gets published on the law school website, and it gets then sent over to the centralized content store. The canonical source is still Sarah's website, for all the metadata you need to put into your page for search engines. But it's also stored in this place. This has no front end itself. This isn't any kind of particular website. It's just a database with content. It gets sent there. And then let's say I run biosciences. And that is an interesting article for me. And I go to this content store, and it's some kind of an editorial interface where there are these articles that are tagged with various areas of interest. And so this article on gene patenting is labeled law and medical and biosciences and ethics, and it's tagged all these things. Maybe I have a dashboard where anything labeled biosciences bubbles up. And I can click a button and say, that's a really interesting article. I want that to appear on my website as well. Now it's syndicated to me. Well, turns out Sarah made an honest mistake. She confused a couple of earlier Supreme Court rulings, got the names of one of them wrong, had to update the article. Very important. But if we're all in islands, I'm not necessarily talking directly with Sarah, and Sarah's not going to remember it. She might not even know that I republished her article, right? I'm sure this happens all the time in organizations where somebody makes a change, and now you got to email somebody and tell them to change this word, and I changed it here, and blah, blah, blah. Sarah makes a change. It gets sent automatically to the content store, and it gets sent automatically to me. And she doesn't have to worry about notifying me. I don't have to worry about validating older content, making sure the changes propagate elsewhere. This is the advantage of a centralized content store. So we're taking this idea of multiple front ends, and we're saying that we now have multiple publishing entities all feeding into one thing, and we can, synergy, right? We can all benefit from each other's work. Decoupling may also make sense if you want to publish to many front ends and experiences. So again, here's our content hub model of all this whole ecosystem of stuff that we might be working with. Let's say I publish a text article or text-heavy article. Well, it doesn't necessarily make sense for that text-heavy article to go absolutely everywhere, right? Like, let's say it's very specific to certain applications. Well, I can pick which front ends it goes to. It doesn't have to go to all of them, but I can be selective about it. Xbox users might not be interested in this piece of text-based content, because who really wants to sit there and scroll through an article on their Xbox? Well, let's say I have a video. A video is definitely not appropriate for all devices because some devices don't even have a screen, like the Amazon Echo. So I publish this video, and it goes out to various sources, obviously smart TVs and Xbox and visual media like that. But it's accompanied by some kind of a transcript. So let's say that you have a video that is really heavy on diagrams and animations to explain a complex process. That transcript needs to describe what's happening in the video. Because what if somebody is blind and they can't see the video? Well, then all they can hear is this audio, and it's probably just background music, right? It doesn't make any sense. So you would have this narrative that you write that is not only the words spoken in the video, but also includes a description of the action of what's happening. That can be sent to your screen readers and to the Amazon Echo so that you can experience this video, not watch it, but experience it through text being read aloud to you. Same piece of content, different experiences based on devices and context, served from a central location. What if you want to integrate multiple backends or services? So this decoupled model actually works when you have multiple backend stuff that feeds into that central store. So this right here is actually a real-world example, minus the AMP yet, of NBC.com. So NBC, I've oversimplified it here, but NBC.com is essentially a Drupal website in the middle that stores all the content and the metadata. And it has all these services like OpenPalette for natural language processing, automatic tagging, so they can publish stuff and it'll just add tags to it, other metadata automatically. There's a video hosting service, of course. They're not hosting video directly out of Drupal. There's whatever hosting service you choose. And then there's Solar Search that's indexing all of this stuff and making it more findable. Well, that's not directly in Drupal. That's a third-party service. But it's having to send this content and metadata to these third-party services, and they're sending the data back, right? That then gets sent to various experiences and devices. So again, a decoupled model works in this instance. Now this is kind of a fancy example, but it's really important for governments and for a handful of media entities as well. If you want to make your content accessible via an API, perhaps even publicly. So here's what I mean by that. Again, the same diagram, more or less. But if you had a public API available that any other service could connect to, you might be able to leverage your fans to write applications on your behalf. And that actually has happened, and I'll get to that in a moment. Or if you're a government entity or a nonprofit or some organization that has to publicly report data, what if you could have that content just automatically accessible through an API, so you're fulfilling all of your transparency requirements, it's publicly documented, and it's the same API that's also powering all of this other stuff. So you kind of get that for free, but now you just publicly document it. So the use case here would be twit.tv. Twit stands for This Week in Tech. It's a very popular videocasting, broadcasting, podcasting network. They went headless. They have a decoupled architecture. We worked with them on this, and I want to talk briefly about why they decided to go headless. And I want to read this in the words of Leo Laporte, who's the host of This Week in Tech. So this is what he said about this new system that they built. It's faster and easier to create new sites. Web design styles change faster than high fashion, so it's nice to be able to update the site without redoing all the hard work on the back end. That's the first reason. Having a complete API would make it easier to do apps. The app, just like the website, would have access to everything there is to know about Twit in a simple, accessible fashion. By making the API public, we encourage members of our audience to create new things, things we might never have thought of. You could even design a website you like better. Abstracting the content from the presentation seems like a big win, and this has happened. So if you look at Apple TV or Roku or I think not Alexa, but some other things, maybe even iPhone and Android, there are these Twit apps that their fans have built off of the API we built for Twit. So they don't have to pay anything to have these apps done. They just have a rabid fan base that's like, I want to be able to watch this stuff on Apple TV. I'm going to go ahead and make it. Because there's the API, right? So they saved themselves a lot of development cost. They basically open sourced access to their content, which is really neat. And then finally, he says, by keeping Drupal simple and avoiding additional third-party modules, we can make a more secure and reliable backend that will be much easier to upgrade when future versions of Drupal arrive. Again, true. Minimize custom code. So when it's time to go to Drupal 8, there's very little that we have to rewrite. There's going to be a database migration and a handful of other things. Maybe rework the content API a little bit to attach to the new endpoints on Drupal 8, and we're done. Front end stays the same. No messing with PHP template to Twig or anything. So here's some links that you can download this. You don't have to worry about it now. But there's the case study. There's the actual API documentation. You too can make your own Twit app. We did also, in the course of doing this, build our own node-powered front-end framework because, you know, there aren't enough out there. But we built our own specifically for Drupal. It's called Saucier. It's called Saucier because we're the web chefs, so everything has sort of a web chefy theme. The Saucier is the chef who makes the sauce, the secret sauce, and then dresses up the final dish. So that's what Saucier does. Feel free to check it out. So I want to review. Decoupling makes sense when you want to do the following things. Doesn't make sense for everybody, but if any of the following feel like they apply to you, this might be a good architecture. 1, you like to adopt cutting-edge front-end technologies. 2, you want to separate upgrades from redesigns. 3, you want to eliminate the tension between the design and your CMS so that you can focus both on users' needs and minimizing custom code. If you need to centralize your content, like you're a university or a multi-departmental organization. If you want to publish to many front ends and experiences, so video goes to some, text goes to other, audio stuff goes to the third, all the same story. If you want to integrate multiple backends or services, if you want to hook up OpenCLA or Solar Search or whatever, and if you want to make your content easily accessible through an API, whether you're a government office and you need to publicly expose data, or you want to do something like what Twit did. So this is where we see things going. First, content is first. Absolutely, content is king. Current CMSs manage websites first and content second. Let's be honest with ourselves. There's a lot of layout management and user management and reset the password and all of that stuff. This is going to change. And this is already starting to change in Drupal 8 with all of the additional functionality and the philosophy of decoupling kind of baked into the offering. So already there's a refocus on content management. We're going to put the content management back in content management systems. Content strategy is going to be a requirement for all organizations. And let's also kind of be clear on what content strategy means. I think a lot of people have a view of content strategy being like, here is what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And that's sort of the equivalent of saying that all of web design is about what a web page looks like. Well, there's stuff that happens behind the scenes. There's all this technical stuff that goes into a website. There's also technical stuff that goes into content. You have to create content models. You have to really understand the data that you're working with. This is also important for SEO when you're dealing with things like schemas. So you need to have content split up into individual fields so you can more easily wrap them in schema tags, or once you want to start doing stuff in AMP, which you're going to need to soon, it's going to be a lot easier to publish that stuff. So you're going to want to create a model for all of your content. The title, author, giant blob of HTML doesn't really cut it anymore. We need to think about what you're trying to do with the content, where those data fields overlap, how you can share them. So content modeling is really key to building a robust digital strategy. And then finally, at some point, we are going to fully divorce content from its presentation. Like, that's absolutely going to happen at some point in the future. So content is absolutely coming first. We need to design for experiences and not just devices. So as iPhone really changed the landscape with mobile web, there was a lot of talk about, like, we need to design for that device. Well, not really. We need to design for a certain experience. And we also need to be, and that experience is touch and swipe and smaller screen and maybe slightly slower bandwidth or connections that aren't entirely reliable. It's all those real world things, because that's part of the experience, not just the device. This doesn't mean, for example, that like responsive web design isn't important, but we really have to think more about the context people are in, and might they be listening to content on earbuds? Are they listening to it in front of a TV? Are they, here's actually an example of something that I learned the hard way. So we got on the whole responsive train like super early, and we started doing a lot of trainings, and I would give these trainings on how to do responsive web design, and there was this example that I always trotted out of, like, think about the context of a mobile user. A mobile user is walking down the street and they're trying to look up something on their phone, and maybe they're late for a meeting, and they're trying to find the address or phone number to a restaurant or whatever, and they're kind of, make that address really like visible, and okay, not really, right? What is, any guesses, what is the average mobile user doing? Sitting on the couch with a laptop beside them and the TV in front of them. It's true. So this idea, like, be sure you know the context, right? Like, it's easy to think like, oh, mobile, on the go, rushing around. Like, okay, maybe some of them, maybe like 10% of them. But for the most part, it's the second screen thing, right? Or the third screen or the fourth screen. They're just sitting there flipping through Facebook. They got a notification. They're texting. They're looking at email. Or it's actually their primary device, right? So that's a different, like, really think about the experience that you're designing for. Front-end technologies, we made this joke earlier about, Polymer and React and Angular and everything else. Front-end technologies are accelerating. Like, it seems like there's one every couple of weeks. CMSs will not keep pace. Stable CMSs cannot possibly keep pace with all of this, nor necessarily should they, by the way. Because right now we're in this boom phase in the front end. All these new devices, people are trying to figure out ways to make it work on all these devices. So as a result, CMSs just need to double down on content. That's what they do. The presentation layer, the experience layer rather, is moving too quickly for CMSs. All of that stuff is on fire right now. So let's put content management back into content management system. We're also seeing rise of what I've just decided to call website management systems, like Squarespace, Wix, Weebly. These are really, really valid services. Like they serve a real, and they look great, you know? So many clients who are like, oh, I need a WordPress site, or I need whatever. Like, really, you just Squarespace, for real. You know, it's fast, you can use it, it'll get you up and running. We can talk about custom stuff later. These are taking over a lot of the website management tasks, or even things like hosted WordPress, WordPress.com, right? Now you can have users and accounts and things like that. So maybe you don't need a layout manager on your website. Likewise, we're seeing a return to smaller static websites, microsites, marketing sites, brochureware sites, right? HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Put it in Jekyll, put it in raw markup, whatever, right? We're seeing a big return to these things as well. I have, so some other thoughts. So this is like, that's a fire hose, and the rest of this is for like just discussion. I've had a couple of really interesting conversations over the last few weeks that I didn't even have time to put on slides because I don't really know what I want to say about them yet. So two things, conversational interfaces to virtual reality. So conversational interfaces. So we built an app for Amazon Echo for NBC. And the app is really simple. By the way, Alexa calls them skills. So the skill is very simple. It's, hey Alexa, what's on NBC tonight? And it reads the schedule. Now what's interesting about reading the schedule is, think about, because there's a field in the NBC Drupal website, or NBC.com, for the schedule. And somebody goes in and updates it every day or every week whenever they decide to publish the television schedule that night. This schedule is written something like Saturday Night Live, Saturday night, comma, 11:30/10:30 CDT. Now you're Alexa. You are a text-to-speech processor, and you are sent that field. Here's the schedule, boom. What does Alexa do? It reads it exactly like I just did, right? Saturday Night Live, Saturday nights, 11:30/10:30 CDT. Imagine Alexa saying that to you. That's not like very friendly. So what did we do? We added a field to NBC's content model that was discussion interface like field. So now you write it as if somebody were saying it literally, right? Saturday Night Live is on Saturday nights, every Saturday night at 11:30, 10:30 Central. And with the pause, you put in a comma, right? Like there are ways that you can like tell Alexa to like put in a pause, wait, right? So you have to take that little bit of content and change it slightly for a different experience. So that's when it's read aloud, which is kind of neat. But what's interesting about conversational interfaces is we assume when we hear like, by the way, that's a term. We usually think it's talking to a computer and a computer talking to us. But the only difference between that and a chatbot is that voice requires an extra step of converting speech to text and back to speech again. Otherwise, you're dealing with a chatbot. That's all it is under the hood. So this is when things get pretty cool about like how this stuff works and where this is headed. So now I'm just kind of giving you like a brain dump of cool things that are on the horizon, right? There's a company in Austin called Voxable that specializes in conversational interfaces. And the way they have to work is pretty fascinating because they have to like hire screenwriters to help them with dialogue. Like this is part of their technical design job, is to work with screenwriters. What's that?
I can do that.
Perfect. So they worked with a startup called Burner. I'm sure it's spelled B-U-R-N-R. But a startup called Burner. Burner provides temporary phone numbers, or burner phones, to people using dating apps so that you don't give away your actual phone number to anybody. And you can shut it down if you're tired of talking to somebody, right? So to promote their service, Burner hired Voxable to create something called GhostBot. GhostBot is a chatbot that you can hand somebody to make them go away, as in ghosting them, right? Ghosting is a dating term where you basically stop talking to somebody and they go away. So here's what's interesting about that. They had to do a lot of research into this, and they got psychologists on board and like screenwriters to do all the dialogue. And Ghostbot basically gives people non-committal answers that are polite but firm. That's it, until they go away. And then they've been ghosted. When polled, heterosexual men hated this idea. Hated this idea. And the reason they gave was they thought it was very rude. It would be very rude of them to sick Ghostbot on somebody else. Heterosexual women love this idea, because it unloaded the emotional baggage of having to deal with somebody who might turn out to be really weird and hostile. Because I haven't used dating, I don't know how they work, but I've heard horror stories, and people have sent me screenshots, their whole Instagram accounts of people posting screenshots from dating app conversations, and they are horrifying. So imagine if you could just eliminate that from your life and have a ghosting bot get rid of them for you, right? Now, all of that stuff has to be stored somewhere, right? Like all the dialogue and the logic and the interface and all of that has to be stored somewhere in a content management system, right? So that's interesting thing one. Interesting thing two is virtual reality, because we're talking about different experiences and the future of content. So back in the 90s, there was that really weird VR thing. It was like giant. Remember this thing? It was like this huge, giant thing that made everybody sick. And it had this weird, like, kind of hand contraption. There was a game called Dactyl Terror. And it was like giant polygon pterodactyls that would swoop down and attack you, and you'd have to shoot them with a suction gun. Anybody remember this? Okay, mid-late 90s. They'd have them at like state fairs and stuff, and they cost like $5 a minute to play or something insane. And everybody experienced that VR, and they were like, no, thank you. This is stupid. This is so bad. And VR like went away for 20 years. And now it is back, and it is awesome. Like really, really awesome. So I've messed around a little bit with Oculus Rift, and that was neat, but the one that really blew me away was the Htc Vive, which was built as a collaboration between HTC and Valve software. Valve makes games like Half-Life and Portal and a bunch of other really, really, really good games. So they created this platform that involves a relatively lightweight headset that you can still wear glasses in, by the way, which was a problem with the Rift. So you can wear glasses inside of it, little headphone thing that you put on, and then these two controllers look like wands with circles on the end. And you put on this headset, you reach down, you pick up the controllers, and suddenly like you're in this very realistic, very cool, fully three-dimensional world. And by the way, you can walk around. So you can walk up to things down there, to barriers that appear, you know, and you like teleport over to other spaces. But you can walk around, and it can see that you're looking down into things or up into things, because it has positional things, like 3 of these little cameras stationed in the room. So it knows where your head is positioned and where you're moving. So this thing, like I played around with it for a while, and it's super cool, and there are all these little fun games and these entertainment experiences, like one person did ultra high resolution photography of a plate of potato chips, and then you become an ant in a pile of potato chips, like moving through it and around it. It's pretty incredible, and it was just done through photography. Somebody just had a regular camera and just went snap, 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 snap in all directions, and software stitched it together and had a 3D world. So that's the kind of VR that we're dealing with. There's also cool game stuff. So I was thinking like, okay, that's all well and good for like entertainment, you know? Okay, I could see how, there's a friend of mine who's trying to figure out like how to make this work for certain industries, and one idea that he has is stick a 360-degree camera on stage at a festival and record it. That in itself isn't particularly interesting, but here's where it gets kind of cool. What if you now hook that up to karaoke, and you look out into the festival audience and you're singing alongside the band in all directions, right? And then for added fun, the people around you can only hear you sing. They don't hear the backing track, right? That's kind of a neat idea. So there's like that kind of stuff. But then, okay, the web. Like, how do you take web content, how do you make the web relevant in VR? And then it occurred to me, e-commerce. So who's seen the scene in Fight Club where he's walking through his apartment and all the stuff populates in his apartment like an IKEA catalog with all the names, the prices, and all of that stuff? That will be real. It could be real right now. Somebody just needs to build the app for it. So let's say you saw a couch that you thought might be interesting. So you want to find out what it's going to look like in your home. So you put on the VR headset, or just drop in something like Google's coming out with a platform in November that's going to be much more lightweight than that. You just drop in your phone into this thing, you hold it up to your head, there's a camera facing outward. Now you're in augmented reality, where you see a feed of the real world in front of you, but it's added stuff to it. So now you can put on this thing, there's the couch. Well, I want to move it over there. Grab it, move it over here. That's about how big it is. That's switch the color, right? Now you see what it looks like in your home. And then you can just tap buy, because now you know that it fits, and you know that the color looks right. Now you haven't sat on it yet. Like, that's a whole other thing we need to figure out. But that could be the future of e-commerce, which now means a different data field that you need to have in your e-commerce site would be 360-degree stitch photography of that object, so that you can rotate it, look around, like spin the couch in midair, right? See what it looks like on the top and bottom, put it somewhere, change the color, right? As far as like other content, maybe some of you have ideas, but like if you're a media company or if you're a university, like maybe you're going to be doing stitched together photographic virtual tours of campus or of a lab for lab safety, or live demonstrations on how to properly mix chemicals, because guess what? You've got controllers and you can pick up the chemicals and you can mix them and you can do things and you can get graded on whatever to become certified to work in that lab. Pretty cool. That's my brain dump. Any questions after all that? Yes, sir.
I have a question that's kind of funny. My brother would ask the same question. You talk about content management, making it headless. Why do you need to use a CMS? When it comes down to it, you're basically creating an API. Mm-hmm. And if you're creating an API, like, why do you need to use a CMS? Why wouldn't you use something like a Java API using Ruby, like what my brother does? Or me, when I was younger, I would have been like, I can do this in Ruby on Rails in like 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. You know, like, why? I sat down and I tried to think, why would you do this in the CMS? And the only thing that I could think of was because we want Joe Blow down the street to be able to just create this, and now he has his own API, but
and
I still think back of like, do I really want Joe writing my API?
But if you have multiple contributors that for a set of content, there has to be some user friendliness.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but everything in Drupal is what? A form. Mm-hmm. Everything in Drupal is a form. And in Ruby on Rails, I can write a script that will generate a huge API, and all it'll give you is what a form is: CRUD application. Create, read, update, delete. Mm-hmm. And if you know what your content is, you can just start and script your whole thing, and boom, you're outputting JSON. And with that, you just end up tagging onto the end of your string what format you want: HTML, RSS, whatever the specific feed is, just pure JSON, XML.
So here's a reason why you might want to do that. It's the same reasons why, like, why not custom build your own platform today and not necessarily even decouple it? It's about maintainability. It's about affordance. It's about what you get that is standardized and teachable and maintainable. So yes, you can always build your own backend system. You can build your own database. You can build custom stuff all day long. It comes down to this kind of approach. If you're custom building absolutely everything, then what happens if you then have to go and somebody else has to pick it up? And they're like, okay, this is custom built Ruby, but this person had a certain way of doing Ruby, and okay, they're using this library. Somebody's going to have to like do a postmortem on how all this stuff is built, and hopefully it's documented, but it might not be. But if it's in a platform like Drupal that's pretty well known and documented, then you get a lot of stuff right out of the box. And you get a whole community of people who know how to use it and understand the best practices around it. So that, you know, yeah, you could, there's certainly situations where a custom thing would be a lot cheaper and faster, but again, we have to think about stuff like maintainability. That's a pretty compelling reason.
So Drupal is custom. When someone is in a UI creating a content type, mm-hmm. that's custom. They're doing it themselves. When I do it, I make it programmatic. So I do it in code. But when an average person is doing it, using it the way that Drupal was kind of intended to be for like to get everybody to be able to build their own website, they're building custom stuff. Mm-hmm. That just ends up being stored in a database instead of files like we would. So
well, in Drupal 8,
this as much as possible. Even
right.
in Drupal 7,
well, in Drupal 8, it is sorted files.
Well, yeah. But even in Drupal 7, when a lot of people were doing things, I've seen a lot of messed up sites where I have to deal with it, where it's truly custom. Like, this is kind of like where you get into the whole reason of like why features was invented and highly used, because it was used to patch a lot of other big.
Well, I mean, by that definition, then, yeah, I mean, by that definition, is everything you're doing in Drupal custom to some extent? Yes, because it's designed to suit your needs. But what it comes down to is like, what is it about Drupal or WordPress or whatever platform you're looking at? What is it that makes it good? What is it that makes it useful? And in my opinion, the thing that makes Drupal really, really great is that it's really good at content modeling. It's really good at dealing with data and storing it and organizing it and exposing it and making it sortable and views and things like that, all kind of built in and ready to go, and creating relationships between those data. That's like fundamentally what Drupal really is that sets it apart from a lot of other content management systems, and WordPress in particular. The new version of WordPress does have a lot of really interesting stuff, and it is making a lot of progress in that area, but there's not a whole lot of like standardized, widely adopted data types and fields in the new version of WordPress. That's still kind of being ironed out. But in Drupal, it's like you get a lot of stuff right out of the box. Like, here's what a text field is going to look like. Here's what the radio buttons and checkboxes and all that stuff will look like and behave like. So again, what it comes down to is it's going to be a business decision. So does it make sense for the client or the organization or the stakeholder to invest in something that is like, to what degree of custom is it? I would say that perhaps, I'm not familiar with Ruby enough to be able to make a point for or against. It's a very popular platform and seems to serve people really well. But Ruby does, from what I understand, has a little bit of a reputation where if a client or a customer wants to add a field to a content type or wants to add a new content type entirely, they have to do so programmatically. And they're going to have to go to a developer usually to help them out with that. Whereas what I think you're calling a way to potentially mess things up, and it totally is, but clients like the ability to say, I actually would maybe want to make my own content type, and I'd like to do it through a UI, and I'd like to add a field, and I'd like to do it through the UI, and I don't want to rely on a developer to have to do absolutely everything for me. So if you can train people in good content strategy and content modeling, they could set up Drupal sites all day long and do so really well and responsibly because they're following best practices and they're, with things like AMP and paying attention to schema markup and stuff like that, giving people the power to create more fields is increasingly important because we then rely less on the giant blob of HTML in the middle of the page, which is where everything currently goes. And most clients would say, I don't want to have to pay a developer to add a new field programmatically. I don't have the budget or I don't have the time or for whatever reason. And then they just kind of say, I just got to get it up there, whatever. They put it in the giant blob and then that starts to grow and grow and grow. So I'd say that is, from a business decision standpoint, a reason to argue for a platform that is content modeled like Drupal is.
I'd also say that Drupal security team reviewing all the contrib code would be a huge factor to enterprise. Whereas if you spin your own CMS out of Ruby.
Well, I'm not saying spin your own CMS.
Well,
I'm just saying, I completely agree. But the only thing I've ever been able to come down is a business decision, which is why most companies always do a technology assessment based off the client's needs. So, yes, Drupal should be doing this. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be, and I'm not saying that this is wrong. I'm just saying that we need to make sure that as a business, that we're not choosing Drupal just because we like Drupal. We should be choosing Drupal because it's good for clients.
And CMS, like not building another Drupal, but you are building a system that is managing content.
And users.
And users. Yes, that's true. And users.
So
The thing about it is it all came from decoupling. It's like this whole concept of end-tier architecture and software engineering, where, you know what, we have really good front-end developers. We want them to just take over and do whatever the hell they want, because then we have to stop listening to them complain. But then we also have really awesome back-end developers. Some of them are very good in Ruby, some of them are very good in PHP, however you want to do it. And so now we're good to go. We can support multiple frameworks, which is, I think, kind of like what our department is, because we consider ourselves open solutions. That's why they hired me, because I didn't know as much Drupal as everybody else did. but I'm in Cold Fusion and Ruby and Java. And so that they can say, all right, now any project that we have come up in the future, if we need a Rails developer, boom, you're going to be the first one we pick. And go on and like so on and so forth. So I love that like people are trying to push for headless and that this is what's coming in the future, because it is. It's just people need to understand that there's always more than just Drupal. And I know I'm kind of like, this is the bad place for this argument. But I don't consider myself to just be a big Drupalist.
Yeah.
I consider myself to be a software engineer.
But that's what it benefits.
Exactly. So one thing I will point out is that the only situations in which I mentioned Drupal were case studies with clients.
Yes.
So there's no particular CMS that I'm actually pushing in this case. Because it could be done really with any modern CMS that allows access to the database through an API.
My brother hates it when we do it. Because he's very much a strong Java developer, and then he started doing Ruby development. I go to him and say, hey, let's write this software because I know we can make a ton of money on it right away. He's like, well, I just want to do it in Ruby. I'm like, well, that's a terrible reason. I just said, I'm like, you got to stop being so lazy. And it's like, I told him, like, you're learning Ruby, you should be learning Ruby as well. What do you think Ruby came?
Right.
On the, sorry. Just real quick, I mean, for clients using Drupal, how often, what percentage of time are you keeping the actual content entry in Drupal as opposed to the display?
Currently, pretty much all the time. But there is the potential for, just to confuse things a little bit. So if we go with the headless metaphor rather than decoupled, you could have a footless Drupal. And what I mean by that is, so let me.
Where the content is coming from elsewhere and being sucked in and then spit back out.
Well, actually, that's actually what's happening on NBC to some extent. But what I'm talking about is there's actually, if you think about it, there are two front ends on every website. If we want to talk about user interface, right? There are two user interfaces. There's the website itself, and then there's the admin and editorial experience on the site. So if, for example, like in this model, you would go to, let's say it's in Drupal. You would go to a Drupal instance to modify the content to look just like your current node editing forms and website management forms, right? But the front end would just appear somewhere else. It would be sent off to some other system and appear in a web browser elsewhere. But this still has an interface to it, and that's the editorial and admin interface. What if you could separate that too and design your own and still use the API here to both insert content into and extract content out of the system? So it's like you're also, if you're removing the head with the front end, you could remove the admin experience at the feet, right? And become footless Drupal as well. Or the tail, yeah, tailless. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah. But that's something that we've discussed that, but we haven't done that actually.
I have a Slack to Drupal module we developed where people post content in a Slack channel and it gets imported to Drupal. So there we could have a team without user management, Slack do that, and we just basically get the content from the site.
Right. So in a model like that, you might have one of these branches in Slack, and that gets then sent into whatever CMS you're using, and then out again.
So, what do you measure for metrics with this model? If not being coupled with how if you were to use this up, what's Google Analytics if you're using that? What's the metric? The front end, the back end. If you're public, you can still measure the back end hits, and this Alexa response that we consider
No, it would not. So the way Google Analytics works is it's a JavaScript call on something that is sent somewhere and displayed and rendered in some way. So anytime that JavaScript is fired would be considered a hit for Google. I'm sure there's some really fine details there that I might be missing, but broadly, I think that's exactly what's happening. So it would be any interface in which that causes a fire. There's nothing on the back end that would do that. Right, like OpenCalais querying content from your database to then add tags to it isn't going to result, at least should not result, in Google JavaScript being displayed in the browser and therefore causing a hit. So it would be, in this case, definitely on your website. Do they allow analytics on AMP? Okay, so there we go.
And native apps.
And native app has its own kind of tracking thing that's a little bit unique. So each of those
Those
would,
can be cached too. So like, right, couldn't your front end be cached, so it's only hitting your content.
That's actually the beauty behind it, is that your deployment strategy
So you want the Google Analytics on
is sending something to AWS.
That's JavaScript, so that's fine.
But
yeah,
what
it's
about-
when it's viewed by
if you were
something.
doing an app, so that worked for government, so if we had an app in the public, technically that would be, it wouldn't be hitting the content directly, it would be something in between, it would be hitting them.
So, like, if you had some sort of caching mechanism, the first time it hit is going to pull it from the back end. After that, it's probably going to store it in the cache, but because it's JavaScript, it'll still trigger the back end each time. The other step there is this back end can be an API concept, and the way that they build for APIs is they track every request to it. So you could implement some sort of layer that says, oh, every time it hits it, and pulling it, it just went
Because you need to report to somebody how many times, how do you report how many results you're getting for that?
Queries.
Or Roku, or
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an analytics expert, so I couldn't tell you that, but I'm sure that there are ways to report it.
preliminary reporting right now that they're adding more and more. There's 7 days really around that, but it's a whole separate system that people have.
So that's where your line of demarcation is there, is like you're getting content through the Roku app, but inside the Roku
Oh,
app.
but what happens in the Roku app is up to the Roku developer and designer.
So imagine inside of each of those things that they're delivering content to, they have some kind of analytics, but he can also build a report on how many times the API is called. You know, it would give you your different endpoint.
It would give you a different measure, but if the API is cached somewhere, then that's, you know, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, at least it's still something.
Mhm.
And you really, when they hit your server, that's a cost to you. So how are you using that at that point? It's not impacting your server so much.
Right, and there are all kinds of different ways to cache results from APIs, and you know, you can expire that for some period of time, or you know, so that's a whole performance issue that you have to work through. But there are a lot of third-party services that handle most of that stuff for you, where you can just point like some kind of JSON feed at it, and it can handle all those things, just like hosting services now, or node hosting services.
So,
Yes, sir.
Just a little plug for GraphQL. The other mention that I at this moment, but Facebook has released GraphQL with this in mind. So instead of building that API and then having to tweak it for every different front end, with GraphQL, you pass what fields you want, what relationships you want, and it kind of allows you to not have to, every time your front end developer needs different data, go back and build some sort of new view into your data on the front end side. I think it's going to replace us pretty quickly there.
So Rust is gone.
Rust is gone.
Wow.
I mean, GraphQL is really probably the same thing for us, but it's not a specific endpoint. It gives you specific fields that you tell what it is.
So I was just saying, because we just couldn't use core, right?
Well, I mean,
Thankfully, there's a DA contrib GraphQL, but
yeah. Which, you know, raises more questions about, like, there might, with this approach, there are kind of 3 layers at this point. There's the back end, there's the API, and then there's the front end, right? And if we're, again, having the API layer rapidly innovate, then that also might be something that we would need to decouple from the whole thing, work independently. Yeah. Abstractions.
just sort of related to all this, your Node.js Salsera, that is producing the initial HTML version for when serving web and native, or is it?
I believe that's the case. I'd have to talk to the people who built it exactly, but yes, that's my understanding.
Is that like, that's what puts everything in pure JavaScript. So you don't just have a really great, huge JavaScript app, which would be wonderful when it loaded 30 seconds after.
Cool. All right, we're out of time right now, but I'm happy to answer any of the questions. So thank you very much for your time.